Sometimes the hardest person to spot is the one who's not ready to handle their own emotions. And sometimes that person is us. Emotional immaturity doesn't always show up as yelling, drama, or big, obvious moments. Most of the time, it hides in the little ways we avoid responsibility, the silent walls we put up when we feel uncomfortable, or the way we make someone else carry the weight of how we feel. It's not about being a bad person. It's about patterns we picked up long before we even knew what they were costing us. And until we can name those patterns, they quietly run the show, shaping our relationships, our trust, and even the way we see ourselves. We've all had moments where we walk away from a conversation feeling frustrated, misunderstood, or like we were speaking two different languages. Sometimes it's because the other person isn't willing or able to meet us where we are emotionally. Other times, if we're honest, it's because we weren't ready to meet them. Emotional immaturity is tricky. It doesn't always look loud or obvious. It can feel like someone constantly shifting the blame, shutting down when things get uncomfortable, or making every conflict about winning instead of understanding. And when it's in our relationships, it can leave us feeling like we're carrying the whole load alone. This isn't about shaming anyone. It's about seeing the patterns for what they are so we can protect our peace, have healthier conversations, and stop losing ourselves in the process. When someone can't meet you emotionally, it's one of the most exhausting and confusing places to be in a relationship. You show up ready to talk, ready to connect, ready to work through whatever is on the table, but the other person just isn't there with you. It's not always that they don't care. Sometimes they really do. But care without capacity still leaves you standing in the same empty space. You're left trying to bridge a gap that shouldn't be yours alone to cross. And over time, that starts to feel like you're giving pieces of yourself away just to keep the relationship functioning at the bare minimum. Emotional connection is not about agreeing on everything. It's about both people being willing to be present in the mess of what's real. That means being able to sit in discomfort, listen without defending, and share without turning the conversation into a scorecard. When someone can't meet you there, you'll notice it in the way they shut down. When things get personal, you'll feel it. When they brush off how you feel, change the subject, or get defensive instead of curious. You'll see it when the moment calls for understanding and they default to avoidance, sarcasm, or even silence. It's not always malicious. Often, it's a skill they never learned, but that doesn't make the absence of it any less painful. A lot of times, the person who can't meet you emotionally grew up in an environment where feelings weren't safe or valued. Maybe they learned early on that vulnerability was a weakness, or that talking about emotions didn't solve anything, so they built a life where they could stay in control by keeping things surface level. That worked fine until someone, you, came along asking for depth, honesty, and presence. And now, the very thing you're asking for feels like a threat to them. They might not even have the words for why they feel that way, so instead they just pull back, shut down, or push the conversation away. The danger is that when you're on the other side of this, you start to adapt in ways that are not healthy for you. You lower your expectations. You stop bringing things up because it's not worth the fight. You become more careful with your words, not to be kind, but to avoid setting them off. And little by little, you stop showing up as yourself. You might even start questioning if your needs are too much, if maybe you're overreacting, if you should just let things go more often. That's not peace. That's walking on eggshells, and it slowly erodes your trust, your joy, and your sense of safety in the relationship. Meeting someone emotionally doesn't require them to have all the answers. It doesn't require them to fix the problem right away. It simply requires them to be there, to listen, to acknowledge, to care enough to stay in the conversation without making it about winning or escaping. And here's the hard truth: if they can't do that, no amount of over-explaining, rephrasing, or emotional effort on your part will make them ready. You can't want it for both of you. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for them and for yourself is to name what's missing. Not in an attacking way, but in a clear, grounded way. You can say, I need you to be present with me when I'm sharing something important. I'm not looking for a quick fix. I just need to feel understood. This gives them the chance to step up without guessing what you need. But it also gives you clarity. If they still can't meet you after you've made it plain, then you have to face the reality of what that means for the relationship. That reality is this: relationships cannot thrive on one person's emotional labor. They cannot stay healthy if one person is always reaching and the other is always retreating. You deserve reciprocity, not perfection, but participation. And participation means they're willing to stretch, even if it's uncomfortable. It means they'll choose connection over avoidance, even if their first instinct is to run from the conversation. It's also worth remembering that emotional capacity can change. Sometimes someone can't meet you right now, but with self-awareness, effort, and maybe even outside help, they can grow into it. But that growth is a choice only they can make. Your role is not to drag them into it, but to stand in your own truth and decide how long you're willing to wait and what it's costing you in the meantime. This is where self-respect comes in. Self-respect is not about punishing someone for not being where you are. It's about protecting your own emotional health when someone's limits start to damage you. That might mean setting firmer boundaries, scaling back how much you share with them, or even stepping away if the gap between you is too wide. It's not easy, and it can feel like giving up on someone you love. But in reality, you're choosing to stop abandoning yourself in the process of loving them. When someone can't meet you emotionally, it's not always a verdict on their worth or your compatibility. Sometimes it's just a reflection of timing, readiness, or the skills they have right now. But it is a verdict on what's possible in the relationship as it stands today. And the sooner you see that clearly, the sooner you can make decisions from a place of truth instead of hope alone. Because hope is beautiful, but hope without evidence will keep you stuck in the same cycles, waiting for someone to become who they're not ready to be. And you deserve a connection that doesn't leave you feeling alone while standing right next to someone. If you're living in that space right now, you're not crazy for wanting more. You're not asking for too much just because you want someone to show up for you the way you show up for them. You're asking for something human, something essential to be met, seen, and valued where you are. And that's not just a relationship preference. That's the foundation of any relationship that's going to last. When conversations keep breaking down, it's rarely because two people don't care about each other. Most of the time, it's because somewhere between what's said and what's heard, the meaning gets lost. And once that happens, both sides start defending themselves instead of understanding each other. You can have the same argument 10 different ways, but if neither of you feels heard, you'll both walk away with the same frustration. It's not the topic that's the problem, it's the way the conversation keeps getting hijacked by old patterns, unspoken fears, and a lack of safety to just be honest. One of the biggest reasons conversations break down is that we stop listening to understand and start listening to respond. When you're already in a defensive state, every word from the other person feels like a setup you have to counter. You're not looking for where they're coming from, you're looking for where they're wrong. And the same thing is happening on their side. This turns the whole exchange into a tennis match of blame where the goal isn't to connect but to win. The problem is, in relationships, winning like that means both people lose. Another reason is emotional overload. When a topic touches something deeper, maybe an old wound or a past hurt, it can cause a reaction that's bigger than the moment itself. Instead of staying in the conversation, one person shuts down, changes the subject, or throws something hurtful back to create distance. It's not always intentional, but it's still damaging. Because when that happens enough times, the other person starts to believe we can't talk about anything real without it going sideways. That belief creates its own wall, and soon the relationship becomes a place where the safest move is silence. Timing also matters more than most of us want to admit. Trying to have an important conversation when one person is already stressed, tired, or distracted almost guarantees a breakdown. You might have the right words and the right intention, but if the emotional climate isn't right, those words won't land. And instead of recognizing the bad timing, we tell ourselves, they just don't care, or they're avoiding me. That assumption adds another layer of tension the next time we try to talk, and the cycle repeats. Unclear expectations are another silent culprit. We go into conversations expecting the other person to know what we need, whether it's a solution, validation, or just a listening ear. But we don't say it out loud. When they give us something different than what we were looking for, we take it as them not trying, when in reality, they may have just been guessing. Clarity sounds simple, but it's rare. Saying, "I don't need advice right now. I just need you to hear me," or "I'd like us to work toward a plan together," can change the whole outcome of a conversation. Without that, both sides are navigating blind. Past baggage plays a big role too. If you've been hurt in previous conversations, whether in this relationship or in others, it's natural to come in already armored up. You brace for the worst before the other person even opens their mouth. That armor might feel protective, but it also keeps you from being fully present. And when they feel that wall, they might put one up too. Now you're both talking from behind barricades, wondering why you can't reach each other. And then there's the tone problem. How something is said can matter more than the words themselves. A request can sound like a demand. A question can sound like an accusation. An observation can sound like criticism. When the tone feels sharp or condescending, it triggers defensiveness before the meaning even registers. You could be saying something completely reasonable, but if the delivery carries frustration, sarcasm, or judgment, it's going to land in the wrong place. One of the hardest truths to face is that conversations often break down because we're more focused on being right than being connected. We tell ourselves we're fighting for the relationship, but deep down we're fighting for our perspective to be the one that stands. And as long as that's the goal, we'll keep talking past each other. Because connection requires humility, the willingness to say, "I might not see the whole picture here," or "help me understand your side, even if I don't agree yet." That humility doesn't mean you give up your voice. It just means you value the relationship enough to slow down and really listen. When you start noticing these patterns, it can be discouraging. You might think, if we can't even talk without breaking down, how can we move forward? But this is where self-awareness becomes powerful. You can't control how the other person shows up, but you can choose how you do. That might mean calming yourself before you speak, choosing a better time to bring something up, or getting clear on what you actually want from the conversation before it starts. It might mean being the one to say, "Let's pause and come back to this," instead of pushing it when emotions are running high. Repair is just as important as prevention. If a conversation goes off the rails, owning your part in that breakdown can open the door to healing. Saying, "I know I got defensive just now," or "I realize I shut down and I'm sorry," shows the other person that you're willing to do the work on your side. That kind of accountability creates safety. And safety is what keeps conversations from collapsing under the weight of misunderstanding. The truth is, conversations don't break down because two people are hopelessly incompatible. They break down because the skills and habits that keep them healthy aren't being used consistently. Patience, clarity, timing, tone, and the ability to manage our own emotions, these aren't natural talents. They're choices we have to make every time we open our mouths to speak. And in the moments we don't choose them, the cracks start to show. If you've been in a season where every conversation feels like walking through a minefield, you're not alone. It's exhausting to feel like you can't bring up what matters without it turning into another argument or cold silence. But that doesn't mean the relationship is broken beyond repair. It means there's work to be done on both sides to rebuild the trust and safety that makes honest conversation possible. Because when two people feel safe enough to slow down, listen, and stay present, even in disagreement, the whole tone of the relationship shifts. You stop bracing for impact and start leaning in with curiosity. And that's when conversations stop breaking down, not because you agree on everything, but because you've learned how to stay connected through the things you don't. Trust rarely disappears in one dramatic moment. Most of the time, it slips away quietly, almost unnoticed, until one day you realize you're holding less of it than you used to. It's not just the big betrayals that erode trust, it's the small, consistent breaks in safety that add up over time. It's when someone promises to call and doesn't. When they brush off your feelings instead of acknowledging them. When they tell you they're listening, but you can see in their eyes that their mind is somewhere else. These moments might seem harmless on their own, But together they create a slow drip of doubt, and doubt is the beginning of distance. Trust lives in the everyday. It's built in the tone of your voice when you're frustrated. It's in the follow through on the small things you say you'll do. It's in whether you tell the truth even when it's inconvenient. That's why it's so fragile, not because people are overly sensitive, but because trust is the foundation we stand on in every relationship. When that foundation starts to crack, even in subtle ways, everything else feels a little less steady. One of the quietest ways trust gets eroded is through inconsistency. When someone's words and actions don't match, you're left unsure which one to believe. They might say they support you, but when it comes time to show up, they're nowhere to be found. Or they tell you they value honesty, but you catch them leaving out important details when it suits them. Over time, you start questioning not just what they say, but what they mean, and once you start questioning that, it's hard to stop. Another way it happens is through emotional unavailability. This isn't about never having deep talks. It's about whether the other person is emotionally present when you need them. If you share something vulnerable and they dismiss it, change the subject, or make it about themselves, it signals that your feelings aren't safe with them. That doesn't just hurt in the moment. It plants the idea that next time, you might be better off keeping it to yourself. And the more you keep to yourself, the more the relationship shifts from connected to distant. Lack of accountability is another slow leak in trust. When someone can't admit when they're wrong, or they always find a way to make the problem about you, it sends a message. You can't count on me to own my part. Without accountability, apologies lose their meaning and promises start to feel hollow. Trust can't grow in that soil. It needs the humility of someone saying, I see where I messed up and I'm going to make it right. Without that, every misstep feels like another brick in the wall between you. Then there's the erosion that comes from broken confidentiality. If you share something in confidence and later find out it's been repeated, even casually, it changes the way you see that person. You might still care about them, but you'll think twice before opening up again. And every time you hold back, the depth of the relationship shrinks a little more. Sometimes the erosion is unintentional. Life gets busy, stress takes over, and people forget the little things that matter. Checking in, following through, listening fully. But even unintentional neglect can feel like a lack of care. Trust isn't built on good intentions alone, it's built on consistent action. And if the actions stop, so does the building. The hardest part about trust eroding quietly is that it can be easy to ignore at first. You tell yourself it's not worth bringing up. You don't want to start a fight over something small. But small things repeated are never small. They shape the way you feel, the way you show up, and the way you believe the other person will show up for you. And it's not just about what they're doing. Sometimes, without realizing it, we contribute to the erosion too. Maybe we stop being fully honest because we don't want to deal with their reaction. Maybe we start keeping score instead of addressing problems as they come up. Maybe we avoid certain topics entirely to keep the peace. Those decisions might feel safer in the moment, but they trade short-term comfort for long-term trust. Repairing trust starts with naming where it's been slipping. That means being willing to have the hard conversation, even if it feels uncomfortable. You can say, I've noticed lately that when I share something important, it doesn't feel like you're really there with me. When you say you'll do something and it doesn't happen, it makes it harder for me to rely on you. These are not accusations. They're observations that give the other person a chance to understand the impact of their actions. But naming it is only half the work. The rest is watching for consistency over time. Trust doesn't rebuild because someone said they'd change. It rebuilds because you can see and feel the change in how they show up. And yes, that takes patience. It also takes boundaries, knowing what you're willing to wait for and what crosses a line for you. It's important to remember that trust is not about perfection. Everyone slips. Everyone has moments where they fall short. What matters is how those moments are handled. Do they take responsibility? Do they work to repair the harm? Do they follow through in ways that make you feel secure again? Those responses are what keeps small cracks from becoming permanent damage. The truth is, trust is built in the ordinary, not the extraordinary. It's built in showing up on time, in telling the truth when it would be easier to hide, in putting the phone down and really listening, in remembering the things that matter to the other person, even if they don't matter to you in the same way. These things might look small from the outside, but inside a relationship, they're everything. If you've been feeling the quiet erosion of trust, pay attention to it. Don't brush it aside or wait for some big event to confirm it. You're feeling it for a reason. And the sooner it's addressed, the more likely it can be repaired. Because once trust is gone, it's not impossible to rebuild, but it's much harder. And it starts with both people being willing to do the work every single day. In the end, trust isn't just about believing someone won't hurt you. It's about believing they'll protect what matters to you, even when it's inconvenient for them. And that belief isn't built in words or promises. It's built in the quiet, consistent ways they show you over and over that you can count on them. Emotional walls don't always look like walls at first. Sometimes they look like independence. Sometimes they look like just not being emotional. Sometimes they even look like strength. But over time, if you pay attention, you start to feel the gap they create. You could be in the same room, talking about your day, laughing at the same joke, and still feel like there's something you can't reach. It's like there's a part of the other person they've locked away, and no matter how close you get, it stays behind that lock. That's what an emotional wall does. It keeps people out, but it also keeps love from fully getting in. Most people don't build emotional walls on purpose. They're built out of survival. At some point, opening up felt unsafe. Maybe it was a betrayal. Maybe it was growing up in an environment where feelings were met with criticism or dismissal. Maybe it was loving someone who didn't know how to love back without hurting you. When those things happen, the mind learns that vulnerability equals danger. And once that lesson is learned, the wall starts to go up one brick at a time until it feels like the only way to stay safe is to keep it there. The problem is, what once protected you starts to cost you, because you can't selectively block out pain without also blocking out connection. An emotional wall doesn't just stop people from seeing your hurt, it stops them from seeing your joy, your dreams, your fears, the real you. And when people can't see the real you, the relationship starts to feel hollow, even if everything on the surface looks fine. From the outside, emotional walls can look like coldness, distance, or disinterest. But on the inside, it's often fear of being misunderstood, fear of being judged, fear of being hurt again. The wall says, if I don't let you all the way in, you can't break me. And while that might keep you from certain kinds of pain, it also keeps you from the kind of love that requires openness to exist at all. When someone you care about has a wall, you'll notice the little ways it shows up. They'll change the subject when the conversation gets too personal. They'll give you the safe, short version of how they're feeling instead of the full truth. They'll keep conversations in the comfort zone, work plans, surface level topics, but avoid the things that would require vulnerability. And you'll start to feel like you're trying to hug someone through glass. You can see them, you can talk to them, but you can't really reach them. The damage emotional walls isn't always loud. It's not constant fighting or dramatic conflict. In fact, it can be the opposite. It's the quiet disconnection that builds over time. You stop bringing certain things up because you know they won't go there with you. You stop expecting deeper conversations because you've learned they'll only go so far. And without realizing it, you start building your own wall in response. Not to protect yourself from them hurting you, but to protect yourself from the loneliness of trying to connect with someone who won't meet you halfway. And here's where it gets tricky. People behind emotional walls often believe they're protecting the relationship by not sharing too much. They tell themselves, if I don't make things heavy, we'll be fine. But the truth is, depth is what makes relationships strong enough to survive the heavy parts. Without it, the bond weakens, and when the storms come, as they always do, there's not enough trust or openness to weather them together. Breaking down emotional walls isn't about forcing someone to share before they're ready. It's about creating the kind of environment where the wall isn't needed. That means showing consistency, keeping confidences, responding with understanding instead of judgment, improving over time. that their feelings will be met with care. Safety is the only thing strong enough to make a wall unnecessary. If you're the one with the wall, it can be hard to admit it's there. You might tell yourself you're just private or that you've moved on from the past. But if you notice that you keep people at arm's length, that you avoid conversations where you might have to be vulnerable, or that you feel uncomfortable when someone else opens up deeply, it's worth asking whether that's privacy or protection. If it's protection, what exactly are you protecting yourself from now? Is it still happening, or is the wall a habit from an old hurt that no longer applies? Letting the wall down doesn't have to mean letting it all fall at once. You can start small, share something honest that you would normally keep to yourself. Let someone see you when you're having a bad day instead of putting on a brave face. Ask for help even if you think you should handle it alone. Each small opening teaches your mind that vulnerability doesn't have to lead to danger, that it can lead to closeness instead. If you're on the other side of someone's wall, remember that pressure doesn't work. Demanding they open up faster will only make the wall stronger, but you can model openness. You can share in ways that invite them in without pushing them. You can ask questions that show genuine curiosity, not interrogation. And when they do open up, even a little, you can handle it with care. Not turning it into a lecture, not using it against them later, not minimizing it because it's inconvenient. Those moments are the cracks in the wall where light gets in, and how you respond will determine whether the wall starts to come down or gets built higher. The truth about emotional walls is that they often hide the very thing we're craving most: real connection. We want to be known, loved, and understood, but the wall says, only if it's safe. The challenge is that connection and safety are built in the same way, through trust, openness, and shared vulnerability. You can't have one without risking a little of the other. Over time, the cost of keeping the wall up becomes heavier than the risk of letting it down. You start to realize that protecting yourself from hurt has also kept you from joy, that the loneliness of being behind the wall is just as painful, if not more, than the hurt you were trying to avoid. And that's when change becomes possible. When the desire for connection finally outweighs the fear. Relationships thrive when there's room for both people to be seen as they really are. That can't happen with a wall in between. It doesn't mean you tell everyone everything. Boundaries are still healthy and necessary, but boundaries are different from walls. Boundaries keep the wrong things out while letting the right things in. Walls keep everything out, even the good. If you've been feeling the effects of an emotional wall, whether it's yours or someone else's, know that it's not hopeless. It can come down slowly, carefully, with the right mix of patience and safety. And when it does, connection feels different. It feels alive again. You can breathe deeper. You can look at each other and know that what you're seeing is real. And that's where love, trust, and real partnership grow. Not behind the wall, but in the open space you create when you're finally willing to let it down. The hardest patterns to break are the ones we don't even realize we're repeating. You wake up one day and notice that, despite all your good intentions, you're having the same arguments, feeling the same frustrations, and ending up in the same place you've been before. The names and faces in your life might change, the details might shift, but the story feels familiar. That's because patterns aren't random. They're habits we've built, often without even knowing it, from the way we've learned to protect ourselves, get our needs met, or keep the peace. And until we recognize those patterns, they keep running the show. Patterns can come from the way we grew up, the relationships we've been in, or even the way we talk to ourselves when no one's around. If you grew up in a home where speaking up led to conflict or punishment, you might have learned to avoid hard conversations entirely. Now, as an adult, you might call it keeping the peace, but in reality, it's keeping the relationship shallow. Or maybe you learned early on that love had to be earned, so you overgive, over-explain, and over-apologize just to feel worthy of staying in someone's life. At first, these behaviors feel like survival, and maybe they were. But as time goes on, they start to limit you instead of protecting you. The tricky thing about patterns is that they feel normal. You've done them for so long that they don't feel like choices anymore. They feel like just who you are. But when you slow down and really look, you see the cycle. For example, Maybe every time someone disappoints you, you tell yourself not to expect too much. You lower your standards, thinking it will hurt less next time. But that's the pattern. You're teaching yourself to settle, which almost guarantees you'll end up in situations where you're not valued. And when that happens, again, it just confirms the belief that you shouldn't expect more. The loop feeds itself. Another common pattern is choosing the same type of person over and over, not because they're right for you, but because they feel familiar. Familiarity feels safe, even when it's not healthy. You might find yourself drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable because deep down, that's the dynamic you learn to navigate growing up. It's not what you want consciously, but it's what your system knows how to survive. So you go after connection, but in a way that keeps you chasing instead of receiving. And every time, you tell yourself, this time will be different, without realizing you've stepped into the same story with a different cast. Patterns also show up in how we handle conflict. Some people avoid it altogether, letting resentment build until it spills out in ways that feel disproportionate. Others meet every disagreement like a battle that has to be won, not realizing that constant combat keeps the relationship in a state of tension. Both approaches are patterns, automatic responses that happen before we've had a chance to choose a better one. Even silence can be a pattern. Shutting down when your hurt might feel like control, but over time, it starves the relationship of the communication it needs to grow. You think you're protecting yourself from saying something you'll regret, but if the silence lasts too long, it becomes its own form of damage. And the more you use silence as protection, the harder it becomes to speak when it really matters. Recognizing these patterns starts with noticing your always and never statements. I always end up being the one to fix things. I never get the support I need. Those statements point to patterns, not because they're entirely untrue, but because they're repeated experiences. Ask yourself, what's the common thread? What do these situations have in common, and what role do I play in keeping them going? That's not about blaming yourself. It's about finding the part you can actually change. It's also about being honest with yourself in the moments when you feel that familiar frustration rising. When you think, here we go again, that's a sign you've hit a pattern. Instead of running through it the same way, pause and ask, what would it look like to handle this differently? Sometimes the shift is small, like speaking up sooner, setting a boundary without apologizing for it, or simply not engaging in the same back and forth that never leads anywhere. But even small shifts can break a cycle that's been running for years. One of the hardest truths about patterns is that they're comfortable even when they hurt. That's why change feels so unnatural at first. Choosing not to chase someone who's pulling away feels wrong if your pattern has always been to prove your worth. Saying no feels selfish if your pattern has been to please everyone at your own expense. Sitting through the discomfort of a hard conversation feels unsafe if your pattern has been to avoid conflict at all costs. But discomfort is part of breaking the cycle. It means you're doing something new. The good news is once you start recognizing your patterns, you can stop taking them personally. You can see that it's not that you're doomed to always end up in the same place. It's that you've been taking the same road without realizing it, and roads can be changed. Sometimes that means learning new communication skills. Sometimes it means setting boundaries you've never set before. And sometimes it means stepping back from relationships that only work if you keep playing your old role. It's important to remember that recognizing patterns isn't about shaming yourself. You built these patterns for a reason. They helped you survive something. Maybe they kept you from feeling alone, or helped you avoid rejection, or gave you a sense of control when everything else felt out of control. There's no shame in that, but survival patterns aren't meant to be permanent. At some point, you have to decide if they're still serving you or if they're keeping you from the life and relationships you really want. If you're not sure where to start, pay attention to repetition. Pay attention to the moments that feel like déjà vu, the arguments that feel scripted, the relationships that leave you with the same emptiness. Those are the signposts, and when you spot one, don't just push past it. Stop. Look at what's happening. Ask yourself, what choice do I usually make here? And what would happen if I made a different one? That's how new patterns start. one different choice at a time. Breaking patterns takes patience because the old way will always try to pull you back. You'll have moments where you slip into the familiar without thinking. That's normal. What matters is that you notice sooner and course correct. Over time, the new choice becomes the new habit, and the old pattern loses its grip. And the more you practice, the more you realize you're not stuck. You were just walking the same circle. The most powerful thing about recognizing your patterns is that it puts the steering wheel back in your hands. You stop feeling like life is just happening to you and start realizing how much influence you have over where you go next. You can't control everything and you can't change other people, but you can change how you show up. And when you change how you show up, the pattern changes too. Because the truth is, you're not meant to keep reliving the same chapter. You're meant to grow, to heal, to write new ones. Recognizing your patterns is how you finally close the old book and start the next story. One where you're not stuck in the loop, but moving forward with intention, freedom, and a whole lot more peace.